Chris Fearon, and I'm gonna be arguing for global warming, like saying how it's real, and I'll be presenting some talking points and arguments to why I believe it's a real problem we have to deal with, and climate change is a serious issue. So my partner,
which makes beats head.
saying it's basically it's a myth and that it does not actually exist. So climate change is an undeniable truth in our day and age. There's a large amount of data and evidence that supports this fact that the Earth's been warming for a long amount of time. One example I prepared a few examples. One example is that there's been a recent increase in the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide, and which is a heat trapping substance. So for the past 400,000 years, the carbon dioxide levels have measured in parts per million was a little under 300. Starting in 1950, however, it's 300, and recently it's grown to around 400, which is very alarming. This increase in greenhouse gases is sure to have an extreme effect on the heating of the atmosphere. They've also been testing ice cores in places such as Greenland and Antarctica, and through this, the scientists have discovered that that climate change that used to take place over thousands of years has been happening in a matter of decades. The thickness of the sea ice in the Arctic has been at astounding rates as well. Ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica have both decreased by at least 36 cubic miles in the time period between 2002 and 2006. There's also been a rise in sea level. The Earth's sea level has grown by 17 centimeters over the last 100 years. The rate for this decade actually appears to be double that incredible rate. The IPCC recorded in 2007 that the sea level of the recorded was on pace to rise by the end of the 21st century. Global temperature taking place since the year 2001. Global temperatures have increased by around 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. There's also been a since the oceans have been warming as well. Since 1969, the temperature of oceans have increased by 0.302 degrees Fahrenheit. I also believe that it's human, like the human race is behind global warming. And one example of this is the Industrial Revolution increased the acidity of waters on the surface of the ocean. The increase around 30%, and this is because basically all the factories and stuff, all the emissions from humans would go to the air, and then that would lead to the stuff like the carbon dioxide being absorbed into the ocean, and the increase of the carbon dioxide We're good.
All right. So I'm Clay Malloy, and I'm arguing the fact that global warming is not man-made. That in fact, I do believe, yes, the Earth's temperature is actually changing, and it will always be fluctuating. The problem with global warming, the theory of global warming, is that it's always changed to meet the need of what is the need happening currently warming in the environment. So the fact that, or the statement that the science is settled doesn't make sense to me. I don't believe that's the case. If that was back in the science for this, somehow the weathermen and women can be right 30% of the time on the weather that each day but somehow we're 100% sure that in the next 20 to 50 to 100 years that the temperature is going to be hotter or colder, depending on the day, of what these quote unquote scientists are saying. Apparently, they think that they're actually gauging this within degrees. My position will be this, and I will, in this debate, I'll provide this as evidence. The science about global warming is not settled. The science has been proven wrong, actually, and that it's much hysteria than anything else, and that money is really the root cause of this. Going back to the point of the truth of global warming is not settled. Actually, there was a petition that was signed by 31,487 scientists and 9,029 PhDs that read this. And it was a petition to the United States government. We urge the United States government to reject the global warming argument that was written in Kyoto, Japan, December 1997, and any other similar proposals. The proposal limits of greenhouse gases would harm the environment, hinder the advance of science and technology, and damage the health and welfare of mankind. There's no conclusive scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will in the foreseeable future cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the Earth's climate. Moreover, there is no substantial scientific evidence that increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide production many beneficial effects upon the natural plant and animal environment of the Earth. As a matter of fact, being a little bit older, I remember back in 1970, two news articles that came out. Not that I really read the Time magazine or Newsweek at such a young age, but there were two very important articles. One that came out in 1974. The headline was on the cover of the magazine, "Another Ice Age," on Time magazine. And Newsweek had their headline was "The Cooling World," which suggested that the meteorologists were predicting that the Earth was actually going into an ice age, and that the food supply would be drastically reduced because of this. The problem with these two articles is that they're written in the media. There were no real science behind it, in which I continue to argue that that's the case, that it's mostly or driven by unconclusive scientific fact. I'll also go over how, in fact, recently in 2014 was supposed to be one of the hottest years on the planet on record, and in fact, it was actually the coldest. And I'll go into. Additionally, I will speak to how we are educating, how we're going after younger people to get them to bring awareness to this problem, because somehow we're not able to being able to teach older people that this is a problem is affecting the way in which money is raised, and that I'm gonna actually help you find the money to where this problem is being drawn. So in my opening statement, I made a reference to 2014. It was stated that was actually going to be, by the scientists, that was actually going to be the hottest year on record. Turns out they were absolutely positively false. It was actually the coldest. As a matter of fact, there was record ice recorded in Antarctica. There was record snowfall in the U.S. And because of this, what they call global warming alarmists had to come up with some phraseology to make them to explain away what was happening, and they called it polar vortex, if you remember back then. And the simple definition of polar vortex is a large pocket of very cold air that year drifted more southern than it had in the past. The biggest surprise of all, which was no real surprise, was the worst of the cold was felt from Fargo, North Dakota, to Minneapolis, Chicago, and St. Louis. According to AccuWeather Chief Meteorologist Elliot Abrams, the Arctic blast had the greatest shock in the central states. Well, having gone to college at University of Kansas, we know, and that time of year when this happened, we typically call that winter. So the polar vortex was a word that they used to kind of scare people, but really it was just winter. And as far as the rising of the tides, we'll quote world-renowned thermo-atmospheric scientist Al Gore, who projected that the ocean would rise by 20 feet in year 100. And we actually elected Barack Obama twice because he told us in his acceptance speech that he would keep the oceans from rising. And he, in fact, I guess, made true on his word, because apparently what the science really shows that the oceans will only rise by a mere foot in the year 2100. You can sense a bit of sarcasm here, but it is the point is clear to me that it's been much about hysteria than anything else. And if you want to, Chris, if you want to talk about that for a minute, and then we can debate another piece too.
Okay, yeah. So saying that basically these scientists are kind of just making up new things and trying to find different types of like non-provable evidence to back up their claims, because they don't have any actual like hard statistical evidence that proves anything for sure. But I think if these scientists, I think if Obama, our president, is traveling to France to sign this, well, he actually just signed this agreement in Paris called I think it's something like the Paris Climate Change Agreement, something of the sort. But basically, it's us, France, and other countries are working together to try to solve the global climate change crisis. And I think if Obama believes that like the research and data that these scientists have come up with, and then it's an explainable argument, and I think it has scientific backing. To quote Obama, he said the Paris Agreement establishes the enduring framework that the world needs to solve the climate crisis. So he's just trying to get everybody together to work on this crisis. I think if it's reached that this crisis has reached this far up in the government, then the scientific backing is, I would say, is true.
Chris, I think you make some excellent points, and I think it's important that there definitely is an issue if all the world leaders are gathering together to talk about this. And yes, I believe we can all be better stewards of our planet. And I'm a huge proponent of us cleaning up after ourselves. But when an agreement is signed that doesn't include India and China, who are the two worst offenders of pollution, and what are we really doing? I mean, what was tried to be set up, I think it was back in 2012 with the carbon tax exchange, which would have been one of the largest Ponzi schemes ever inflicted on the American taxpayer, where we were actually going to be taxed for carbon emission, even when other countries weren't going to be taxed on it as well. So this would have been something that would continue to drive our workforce down. People would lose jobs. More regulations were proposed on corporations, which would even depress the economy even worse than it was during that time of the Depression in 2007 and 8. But I think what's important here is where the focus has gone. It's gone away from talking to the adults, having a conversation in the room, to where now the real money is being spent and pushing this discussion on our children. I have an 11-year-old son who's in school, and he's even come to me with conversations about global warming and said some pretty off the wall things about how we're polluting the world. And I don't know if you remember the commercials of where polar bears are falling out of the sky. Well, that hasn't happened yet, and I don't believe it'll ever happen. But when the EPA spends $10.8 million to train teachers to teach kids about global warming, and when the federal government pays $4.9 million to create hypothetical utopia climate change futures for colleges to study, I think we're getting kind of out of our bandwidth here of what's really important and how we really protect this country and the world from you know our use of and how we manage waste. NASA, which was basically depleted to nothing, spent all their money. Well, actually, not all of it, but in 2010, they spent $1 billion on focusing specifically on global warming. Well, I thought NASA was helping us go to, space, not affect us in global warming. So I do think there's an issue out there. I don't know if anybody can really say if the weather, if in 10 years or 20 years or 100 years, the weather's going to be hotter or colder. But I think through the studies, through what we've learned in class, is that the Earth is always changing. It's alive. It's getting hotter. It's getting colder. And we've gone through these evolutions that we've studied in class, and I think that will always continue. Are we a part of it? I don't know if we're a big enough piece to affect it, but I do think that something is happening, and it will always happen. And I'm not sure that we'll be able to stop it, even if it is. But imposing ridiculous fines and taxes on ourselves that reduce jobs creations and creation opportunities and stymies our economies, not only ours but other countries. I just don't think that's where the focus should be. I think it should be, hey, you know what? I think we should all be better stewards of the earth and just simply pick up after ourselves. And that's a great place to start if we want to spend money there.
Just regardless of whether you believe in climate change or not, whether you think there's not enough evidence out there to prove it, or whether you just think it will never be a big factor, like humans aren't doing enough damage to the environment to do something like that, I still think it just like wouldn't hurt for everybody to come together and just work on creating a more eco-friendly environment for generations to come, because we're kind of, as of right now, we're being really short-sighted with like our use of fossil fuels and just everything of the sort. We're being very wasteful. So it'd probably be best, even if you don't believe that global warming is true, we still need to work together to create a better environment.